shovel strikes glass. Behind the crematorium, workers uncover a small jar, sealed, with a note inside. For those who come after us, we will not live, but perhaps our words will. These voices were never meant to survive, so they buried themselves. This is not a tour of Auschwitz. We follow what was meant to be erased. Buried Sonderkommando diaries. Engineers drew blueprints for bathhouses with sealed walls, reinforced doors, and vents in the ceilings. Orders carried signatures, initials, approval stamps. The language read of hygiene, but the design spoke of death. Soon, trains arrived from every corner of occupied Europe: Hungary, France, the Netherlands, Greece. Each car carried up to 2,000 people, packed so tightly they could not sit. Children cried for water. Mothers fainted from beneath the mask of routine. But the SS did not dirty their own hands. Others were forced to do that. Prisoners, chosen and condemned, waited for the bolts to open. Their role was darker still. And it is here, in the shadows of the gas chamber, that we find them, the Sonderkommando. They were called Sonderkommando, the special units. But there was nothing special in the honor of their task. They were forced into the blackest labor of Auschwitz, dragging the dead from the gas chambers, cutting hair from scalps still warm, prying gold teeth from jaws, and feeding the bodies of men, women, and children into roaring ovens. Their every breath reeked of death. Their every step was through ash. They lived with no illusions. Sonderkommando 28 Polish men, teachers, farmers, shopkeepers, were marched into a former Polish army barracks. Guards shaved their heads. They stripped their names away and burned numbers into flesh. Hunger, disease, and beatings followed. Within months, hundreds were gone. The barracks soon expanded. Wooden watchtowers rose. Barbed wire stretched across fields. Auschwitz I, the original prison camp, became only the beginning. In 1941, work began on Auschwitz II, Birkenau, a vast complex of wooden huts. Officers barked orders, their dogs straining against leashes. Men were separated from women, the elderly from the young. Papers were taken, names recorded, but the destination was already fixed. The SS excelled at deception. With clipped voices and polished boots, they lied as easily as they breathed. Prisoners were told to undress for disinfection. Guards demanded order. Clothes folded, shoes lined neatly, valuables labeled for safekeeping. Mothers whispered to children that they would bathe soon. The air was thick with dread, but the promise of water offered a sliver of hope. That hope was the weapon. The tiled chambers looked harmless enough. Clean floors, rows of shower heads, pipes stretching across the ceiling. Even here, the SS kept. In sterile rooms, experiments unfolded like scenes from a nightmare. Chemicals injected into eyes in grotesque attempts to alter color. Bones broken to study healing. Surgeries performed without anesthesia. In one case, 2 children were sewn together, back to back, in a twisted attempt to create artificial Siamese twins. Infection consumed them, their screams echoing through the barracks until silence came with death. When a child died, dissection followed. Organs preserved in jars. Notes written in perfect handwriting. Human agony reduced to neat statistics. And Mengele was not alone. Nurses strapped children down. Assistants wrote results. Other doctors, trained to heal, stood watching and complied. To the prisoners, he was the angel of death. Yet he did not look like a monster. He looked like a man. That was the terror. Cruelty wearing a human face. But Mengele's twins were only the beginning. Deeper inside the camp, experiments on women, ignored warnings, and the ledgers that turned murder into industry. Auschwitz began as barracks and ended as a factory. Blueprints labeled them bathhouses, steel doors, vents, showers without water. How could such deception erase thousands a day? Let's begin at the ramp. May 20th, 1940. A train pulled into the small Polish town of Oświęcim. Once known for its quiet streets and farmland, it now stood under new orders. German occupation had renamed it Auschwitz. That morning, 7 words could. One note told of a mother who clutched her child until the end, her body locked around the tiny frame even in death. Another described fingernails clawed into concrete, silent proof of the last fight for air. These testimonies were not polished histories. They were cries hurled forward into the future, messages to strangers who had not yet been born. Decades later, when some of these bottles were unearthed, the words were faint, the paper fragile, but the voices were unmistakable. From beneath the soil, the condemned spoke again. It was as if the ground itself whispered of fire, gas, and ash. Why did they risk everything to write? Because silence was surrender. Because even in the heart of hell, they wanted the truth to outlive them. They could not save themselves, but they saved the memory of what was done. And memory is what the Nazis feared most. Because if words could survive, so too could the faces of those who suffered, not just in the gas chambers, but in the laboratories, where twins heat. Many never survived the journey. Those who did stood at the ramp beneath the gaze of SS men. A flick of a hand decided who would work and who would vanish. By 1944, trains came almost every hour. Smoke bled from chimneys day and night. Ash coated the ground like a second snowfall. The camp had completed its transformation. Auschwitz was no longer a prison. It was a killing ground. And behind its walls, the cruelest trick awaited. Doors marked with showers that led only to death. May 1942. Trains screeched into Auschwitz, carrying thousands who had been promised a new life in the East. Families stepped down from the cattle cars into blinding light, clutching bundles, children, and scraps of bread. SS ought his gun, but his smile. Among the crowds, he searched for twins. Identical or fraternal, young or old, it didn't matter. Twins were precious, living specimens for his research. They were pulled aside, parents clinging desperately until guards tore them away. Some mothers felt a flicker of relief when their children were chosen. Relief turned to horror soon enough. The children were measured, their skulls prodded, their eyes pierced with cruel instruments. Needles slipped strange substances into their veins. Sometimes Dr. Mengele offered sweets, a fatherly gesture that disguised the scalpel waiting in his hand. What kind of science? Some laughed at the prisoners' trust. Others shouted and shoved, forcing the naked crowds inside, cramming them shoulder to shoulder until there was no space left to move. Then the doors slammed shut, steel bolts locked. The lie revealed itself. No water came from the nozzles. Instead, Zyklon B pellets clattered through vents, hissing as poison spread. The first breath seared the lungs. Panic erupted. Fists pounded the doors. Nails scraped stone. Children wailed as the chamber dissolved into chaos. The SS listened from outside. Some smoked cigarettes. Some joked. The sounds of agony were entertainment, proof of control. Minutes dragged until silence swallowed the chamber. Only then did the bolts grind open. What remained inside was not human. Not to them. Piles of corpses twisted together. Mouths frozen mid-scream. Eyes glazed with terror. Were led away by a doctor with cold blue eyes. The train screeched to a halt. Families stumbled from the cars, blinded by floodlights, choking on smoke. And there he stood, boots polished, uniform immaculate, clipboard in hand. A flick of his fingers, left or right, sealed their fate. Hours of life or death in the gas. His name was Dr. Josef Mengele. Prisoners remembered Namanda were not spared. The SS kept them alive only for a few months, then shot them, replaced them, erased them. They were tools, witnesses the Nazis could never allow to survive. Yet in the cracks of this machinery of annihilation, these prisoners found a way to strike back. Not with weapons, with words. At night, in secret, by the faint glow of smuggled candles, They wrote scraps of paper, torn notebook covers, shards of pencil stubs. Their hands shook, but they scratched down what they had seen. The choking cries inside the chambers, the groan of the ovens, the endless piles of hair, shoes, ashes. They buried these scraps in bottles, jars, and cans, hiding them beneath the earth near the crematoria. They knew they would not live, but perhaps there were mothers locked in death's grip, still clutching infants. The SS gave no pause. Their work was mechanical, relentless, repeated train after train. Every detail was designed to strip dignity. The false showers, the promises of life, the theft of gold teeth and hair, the cataloging of possessions, lies layered upon lies until death itself was hidden. Mud paths and endless fences designed to hold tens of thousands. Nearby, Auschwitz III grew beside IG Farben's chemical works, forcing prisoners into brutal labor. But Auschwitz was not built only to imprison. By 1942,